Chapter 8 of Barnaby Rudge. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Barnaby Rudge by Charles Dickens. Chapter 8. Clear of the locksmith's house, Sim Tappertit laid aside his cautious manner, and assuming in its stead that of a ruffling, swaggering, roving blade who would rather kill a man than otherwise, and eat him too if needful, made the best of his way along the darkened streets. Half pausing for an instant now and then to smite his pocket and assure himself of the safety of his master-key, he hurried on to Barbican, and turning into one of the narrowest of the narrow streets which diverged from that centre, slackened his pace and wiped his heated brow as if the termination of his walk were near at hand. It was not a very choice spot for midnight expeditions, being in truth one of more than questionable character, and of an appearance by no means inviting. From the main street he had entered, itself little better than an alley, a low-browed doorway led into a blind court or yard, profoundly dark, unpaved, and reeking with stagnant odours. Into this ill-favoured pit the locksmith's vagrant prentice groped his way, and stopping at a house from whose defaced and rotten front the rude effigy of a bottle swung to and fro like some gibbeted malefactor, struck thrice upon an iron grating with his foot. After listening in vain for some response to his signal, Mr. Tappertit became impatient, and struck the grating thrice again. A further delay ensued, but it was not of long duration. The ground seemed to open at his feet, and a ragged head appeared. "Is that the captain?" said a voice as ragged as the head. "Yes," replied Mr. Tappertit haughtily, descending as he spoke. "Who should it be?" "It's so late we gave you up," returned the voice, as its owner stopped to shut and fasten the grating. "You're late, sir." "Lead on," said Mr. Tappertit with a gloomy majesty, "and make remarks when I require you. Forward!" This latter word of command was perhaps somewhat theatrical and unnecessary, inasmuch as the descent was by a very narrow, steep, and slippery flight of steps, and any rashness or departure from the beaten track must have ended in a yawning water-butt. But Mr. Tappertit, being, like some other great commanders, favourable to strong effects and personal display, cried "Forward!" again, in the hoarsest voice he could assume, and led the way with folded arms and knitted brows to the cellar down below, where there was a small copper fixed in one corner, a chair or two, a form and table, a glimmering fire, and a truckle bed covered with a ragged patchwork rug. "Welcome, noble captain!" cried a lanky figure, rising as from a nap. The captain nodded; then, throwing off his outer coat, he stood composed in all his dignity, and eyed his follower over. "What news to-night?" he asked, when he had looked into his very soul. "Nothing particular," replied the other, stretching himself; and he was so long already that it was quite alarming to see him do it. "How come you to be so late?" "No matter," was all the captain deigned to say in answer. "Is the room prepared?" "It is," replied the follower. "The comrade, is he here?" "Yes, and a sprinkling of the others. You hear 'em?" "Playing skittles," said the captain moodily. "Light-hearted revellers." There was no doubt respecting the particular amusement in which these heedless spirits were indulging, for even in the close and stifling atmosphere of the vault the noise sounded like distant thunder. It certainly appeared at first sight a singular spot to choose for that or any other purpose of relaxation, if the other cellars answered to the one in which this brief colloquy took place, for the floors were of sodden earth, the walls and roof of damp bare brick tapestried with the tracks of snails and slugs. The air was sickening, tainted, and offensive. It seemed, from one strong flavour which was uppermost among the various odours of the place, that it had, at no very distant period, been used as a storehouse for cheeses, a circumstance which, while it accounted for the greasy moisture that hung about it, was agreeably suggestive of rats. It was naturally damp besides, and little trees of fungus sprung from every mouldering corner. The proprietor of this charming retreat, and owner of the ragged head before mentioned, for he wore an old tie wig as bare and frowsy as a stunted hearth-broom, had by this time joined them, and stood a little apart, rubbing his hands, wagging his hoary bristled chin, and smiling in silence. His eyes were closed, but had they been wide open it would have been easy to tell, from the attentive expression of the face he turned towards them, pale and unwholesome as might be expected in one of his underground existence, and from a certain anxious raising and quivering of the lids, that he was blind. "Even Stagg hath been asleep," said the long comrade, nodding towards this person. "Sound, captain, sound!" cried the blind man. "What does my noble captain drink? Is it brandy, rum, usquebaugh? Is it soaked gunpowder or blazing oil? Give it a name, heart of oak, and we'd get it for you, if it was wine from a bishop's cellar or melted gold from King George's mint." "See," said Mr. Tappertit haughtily, "that it's something strong and comes quick, and so long as you take care of that you may bring it from the devil's cellar if you like." "Boldly said, noble captain," rejoined the blind man. "Spoken like the 'prentice's glory. Ha ha! From the devil's cellar! A brave joke! The captain joketh. Ha ha ha!" "I'll tell you what, my fine feller," said Mr. Tappertit, eyeing the host over as he walked to a closet and took out a bottle and glass as carelessly as if he had been in full possession of his sight. "If you make that row you'll find that the captain's very far from joking, and so I tell you." "He's got his eyes on me!" cried Stagg, stopping short on his way back and affecting to screen his face with the bottle. "I feel 'em, though I can't see 'em. Take 'em off, noble captain. Remove 'em, for they pierce like gimlets." Mr. Tappertit smiled grimly at his comrade, and twisting out one more look, a kind of ocular screw, under the influence of which the blind man feigned to undergo great anguish and torture, bade him in a softened tone approach and hold his peace. "I obey you, captain," cried Stagg, drawing close to him and filling out a bumper without spilling a drop, by reason that he held his little finger at the brim of the glass and stopped at the instant the liquor touched it. "Drink, noble governor. Death to all masters, life to all prentices, and love to all fair damsels. Drink, brave general, and warm your gallant heart." Mr. Tappertit condescended to take the glass from his outstretched hand. Stagg then dropped on one knee and gently smoothed the calves of his legs with an air of humble admiration. "That I had but eyes," he cried, "to behold my captain's symmetrical proportions! That I had but eyes to look upon these twin invaders of domestic peace!" "Get out," said Mr. Tappertit, glancing downward at his favourite limbs. "Go along, will you, Stagg?" "When I touch my own afterwards," cried the host, smiting them reproachfully, "I hate 'em. Comparatively speaking, they've no more shape than wooden legs beside these models of my noble captains." "Yours!" exclaimed Mr. Tappertit. "No, I should think not. Don't talk about those precious old toothpicks in the same breath with mine. That's rather too much. Here, take the glass, Benjamin. Lead on. To business." With these words he folded his arms again, and frowning with a sullen majesty, passed with his companion through a little door at the upper end of the cellar and disappeared, leaving Stagg to his private meditations. The vault they entered, strewn with sawdust and dimly lighted, was between the outer one from which they had just come and that in which the skittle players were diverting themselves, as was manifested by the increased noise and clamour of tongues, which was suddenly stopped, however, and replaced by a dead silence, at a signal from the long comrade. Then this young gentleman, going to a little cupboard, returned with a thigh bone, which in former times must have been part and parcel of some individual at least as long as himself, and placed the same in the hands of Mr. Tappertit, who, receiving it as a sceptre and staff of authority, cocked his three-cornered hat fiercely on the top of his head, and mounted a large table, whereon a chair of state, cheerfully ornamented with a couple of skulls, was placed ready for his reception. He had no sooner assumed this position than another young gentleman appeared, bearing in his arms a huge clasped book, who made him a profound obeisance, and delivering it to the long comrade, advanced to the table. and turning his back upon it,